Hi everybody, we're going to be looking at Chapter 4 in the Owens and Valesky book, which I argue is probably the toughest, most challenging, and most complicated chapter in the book. If you need anything with this chapter, please let me know. Take some time, try to understand some of the elements of it, and hopefully it can help you as you write and you craft your dissertation. So why is this the toughest chapter in the book? Well, it's the toughest chapter in the book because it really looks at systems theory. This takes a while to understand and comprehend. I picked the Scott book out because that looks at systems-based approaches, but this is kind of the pre-watch before the Scott book. I would say read the chapter. This is something that can benefit you on your dissertation, and it is highly complicated as well. So the most important theme in organizational theory is the interaction between structure and people. The structure determines the people in the organization, because sometimes the organization can't change, but the structure determines who are the people that are going to be there, who are the people that are going to sustain and impact the organization. I argue in schools this is 100% the case. I've looked at person-environment fit theory quite frequently. I know that certain people work better in certain organizations depending on that notion and that concept of fit. Think about the teachers that you work with. Some of them would be better in different grades and different placements. And you have to determine where the best fit for them is. If you can control this as an administrator or superintendent, this is very beneficial to you in your learning of organizations and how organizations work. So a book that I would encourage you to look at is by Senge, and it's called The Fifth Discipline on what a learning organization looks like. Go over personal mastery, mental models, team leadership, shared vision, and in systems thinking. So systems thinking is really what the Scott book covers. The other stuff, you would get that more in a leadership class, I would argue, but that can make the other disciplines in the organization more effective. So general systems theory basically says an organization has a bunch of interdependent structures and functions. There are groups that work together, and the group has to work in harmony. Each person should know what the other is doing, and each one must be capable of receiving messages and must be sufficiently disciplined to obey. So, in schools, only one of these objectives is one that I question. Does everybody know what the others are doing? When we spoke about teaching, we said teaching was isolated and secluded, and it's difficult for individuals to know what the other teachers in the organization are doing and what that looks like. So, systems are divided into two main classes: open systems, which interact with their environments; closed systems, which do not interact with their environment. Schools are closed systems. We argue that they are because the school itself is its own environment, and it's not open for the public to get their own beliefs and views in. However, when we have public forums and we open up schools to the public, that's when it becomes an open system. That's the argument I would make, and it's the argument that others have made as well. When you have an organization, in theory, everybody has a role, and they should know the role. Different stakeholders have different expectations, and that happens all the time, and this causes role conflict to occur. One of the common sources of tension from role conflict is what the administrator expects their subordinates to do in their roles. It makes trust difficult to build, and it also makes relationships difficult as well. So, I'm going to argue that you have staff members in your building who think that you could do a better job, you could do their job better than them. I'm sure you have staff members in your building who think they could do a better job than you. It probably upsets you when they don't do what you would do in that situation. So you have to think, is that acceptable? Is that proper behavior, proper practice? And does that impact morale in your position? So ambiguity occurs when people don't know what they're supposed to be doing. Tensions occur when this happens, when staff have different expectations than the administrators have. This causes role ambiguity, and it causes people to be awkward in what they're doing within the organization. So, my question I ask anybody, and we look at this more in the Human Resources chapter: do your teachers have vague roles in your district? Do you have an expectation that you think every teacher should be doing, but they don't? Can you do a detailed job description for every teacher in your building so they know what they're doing? Does that make sense? Is it acceptable? Yes, these are practices that if you did them, they would be excellent practices. But are they fair to expect within your organization? In terms of functional roles in the group, there are 11 different roles that are important to help groups achieve tasks. We're going to look at each one of these. I put them in table form, and then we'll talk about each one of them individually. So here are the 11 ideas, and we're going to, like I said, we're going to talk about each one of these easily. How can we initiate action? Most of the time, principals and superintendents do this through staff meetings, emails, and professional development. What I argue is that for any of these, you have to have a strong plan. You have to make sure that your staff is interested in what you're doing, because that's going to help them contribute to ideas to improve the organization. When you seek information, I would argue that one of the best, most effective ways to do this is to have a good relationship with your secretary. They will give you information that you might not have known that will help you understand the organization better. If you can meet one-on-one with teachers and teaching staff, that can also help as well. When you try to seek information in a large group setting, that doesn't work too well in schools. Opinions through the group. One of the arguments that I always make is that professional development surveys are one of the stupidest and most ineffective ways that you can do this. I would ask you in class why that's the case, but since this is a video lecture, I'll tell you. When you do a post-survey, most people will not respond the way that they expect to, because they're worried that their feedback is going to impact how they are perceived in the organization. So one of the things that I always suggest is try to find ways that you can get opinions from your teaching staff where there's no pressure. I always say this can be done in quantitative studies using things like SurveyMonkey and Qualtrics, which are trusted and will not basically break what the teaching staff should be expecting and what they're doing. So you are the leader of your building and or the leader of your district. When that happens, the information that you give has to be clear, easy to follow, and easy to understand. Your role is to be as transparent as possible and make yourself available to answer questions either in a group forum or on a one-on-one basis. So, giving opinion. You have to remember what we've said about, this whole notion of teachers as narcissists. Even if you don't believe that teachers are narcissists, you have to understand that you're going to be working with teachers who want to give their own opinion constantly. When this happens, you have to try to find a way to make the teachers think that your idea is actually their idea. This will increase the amount of buy-in that your teachers actually have within the organization, and it's going to make them think that they are actually the leaders in doing what the organization needs. That's a very, very, very good thing, because when that happens, the responsibility falls off of your heads and it's given more to the teacher, which is perfectly acceptable. So when you have to try to coordinate the work of group members, this hardly ever works. The argument I always make is, you have the professional development and services where you have a team meeting and then a whole house meeting. You have to try to keep your teachers on task when these meetings occur. When they're working together in groups after a long in-service, this can be something, that can be challenging. My advice to you is, when you're doing professional development in the morning, you're much better off just sitting up in front of the teachers and being casual. You have to rotate like crazy when they break out into small groups and make sure you're staying on them with tasks and giving them the opportunities to do tasks and improve from them. Keep the group focused on goals. When you have professional development initiatives, have you found the teachers hit the ground running in the beginning and then it dies down? This tends to be a challenge with professional development. So what can you do to fix this? What can you actually do to change this with your teaching staff? So when you have to evaluate and be critical, teachers do not like criticism. When you do staff evaluations, you need to present feedback in an easy to understand manner, and when you have data, show the data. When staff receive appropriate criticism, you have to try to maintain a relationship with them by telling them things like, if you do this, this will benefit students, and then if they disagree with you, then, what's it worth anyway? They're not doing what's in the best interest of kids. You also give them opportunities to improve and opportunities to learn and grow from the decisions that they've made. So, I think when you prod, it's difficult to prod in certain times, but there are other times when it's completely 100% acceptable to be prodding your staff to do things. The argument that I've always made has been that really, after Thanksgiving, before Christmas, and after standardized testing, these are when teachers, students, they're just not feeling it. My personal experience has also shown me that this is also the time when the district tries to shuffle in social studies and science, but that's, you know, that's another challenge that we have in schools and organizations. So try to think of appropriate ways that you've prodded your teachers to action after these time periods occur. So you need to make sure that your building secretary, that you know them, that they understand routine housekeeping tasks, and when you make a mistake, they can let you know how things are going and when you need to intervene. If you trust your secretary and if they are not working out, find a new one. They are the most important hire you make as a building principal, and I promise you that. So, as we've said before, principals and superintendents are very busy. If you do something daily and you do it correctly, this is great. Write it down. Make sure that it's done and it's part of the organizational culture. If something goes bad, throw it away. Don't do it again. It's something that impacted the organization once, so we don't want to reinvent the wheel. So this one is probably going to be a little difficult to see. The only thing that I tell you to do really is look at page 105 of the textbook and really the rule related to social systems theory. There are diagrams that will tell you kind of the difference between a static reaction and a dynamic reaction. When you have dynamic equilibrium in your school system, this is when there are changes to the system that help steady the system as well. If a system can't pick up accurate feedback or not enough information to decision makers is provided, that can be a problem. They're not going to be able to change because you have no idea of knowing whether the changes are actually helping or hurting the district. So the systems stay dynamic and they end up being declining systems over time. So one of the things that I would have you do in a master's level class is I would have you read Good to Great. It's a famous business book by Jim Collins. I looked at why Circuit City went from being a good company to a great company. It's an interesting case study to look at longitudinally because Circuit City did not compete with the dynamic environments necessary to be successful. This includes Best Buy. This includes online shopping. Circuit City really had a model that was based more on commission-based earnings for its employees, which they couldn't afford when you were being undercut by places like Best Buy and Walmart. So schools are dynamic. You have no control over what's going on with schools because of external conditions. How many of you had input on the teacher administrator evaluation system? You know, in the times I've taught this class, only 1 or 2 people said they actually had input. So if you did it make anything change? Did it do anything to help the evaluation system? So even though it's a dynamic environment, you might have no control because of the external contexts that are being presented in front of you. So we have 4 interacting subsystems in an organization. We have structure, task, technology, and people. If one of them changes, the other one is going to change as well. You don't need me to explain when people leave, the structure changes. When people leave, the tasks change. But I want you to note that when technology changes, that can impact staff as well. If there's been a major change in technology in your district or building, that has a high possibility of impacting your staff. Contingency theory is really this notion of, you know, how the organization runs, where classical people will say top-down hierarchical models, human relations organizationalists say we have community and collaboration. I say none of this matters, it just depends on the environment. The environment defines kind of which of these organizations works and which one works. Rational planning models, how we hire somebody, how we train them, how we do budgeting, how we do school finance, are mechanical in operation because it makes sure that you know and understand the chain of command, and it's also militarized, meaning that we want to make sure that everybody's getting the same exact experience and the same exact feedback when they're looking at this as well. So what are some of our more mechanical approaches to organizations? Well, they're highly differentiated and specialized tasks with specification of rights, responsibilities, and methods. Our control exists through hierarchical supervision. So what you do as the assistant principal is entirely dependent on what the principal is doing. What the principal does is dependent on what the superintendent does. You have a strong top-down chain of command that can be good and that can be bad. At least you know who you're answering to, but there can obviously be problems with that. Leadership will go authority obedience more than anything else. And anybody who makes decisions are at the top levels of the hierarchy. So what schools are more mechanical would be the question that I would ask for discussion. Well, the argument that I always make is your mechanical schools are going to be ones that are your urban schools. Your urban schools end up being more mechanical because they have federal, state, and local control that is making them more mechanical, that is pushing for a top-down function. I would argue also that your elementary schools are less mechanical than your high schools are. High schools almost have to be mechanical, especially if you have 3 or 4 assistant principals, because they all have to know what they're doing, they have to know their role and responsibility, and how they can contribute to school improvement. We go over 6 of the organic approaches to schools. If you have ones that have good communication externally, mutual confidence, team leadership style, decision making is shared between constituents, you would say that your school organization is probably more organic in nature. So what schools are more organic? These are your high flyers. These are your top performers. Elementary schools are much more organic than high schools. The concept of the academy school, or the 4-5, or the 5-6 school, those school systems are going to be more organic. Schools that don't need federal money, they're going to be more organic as well. Schools where the local constituents say, hey, we're doing a good job, they're going to be more organic as well. So, is this fair? You know, could large urban school districts benefit more from this approach? How do you balance it? Can you study this as a research project? Well, let's answer the questions. Is this fair? No, it's not fair. Would large urban school districts benefit from a more organic approach? The BRIC text says that they will, but you need to know that the BRIC text really looks at elementary schools. Probably the elementary schools, if they used a community schools model, would benefit more from that type of approach. How do you balance it as an administrator if you are in a non-organic system or school district? My advice always is that your responsibility, more than anything else, is to make sure that the teachers have say and the teachers have choice. Can you study this as a research project? Absolutely, but it's also one that has to be done longitudinally. So, when we look at contingency theory, here are your takeaway messages. There is no best one way to organize schools or districts. They're all different. This is why we talk about levels of abstraction. Not all organizations, not all ways of administering schools are equally effective. It's dependent on the appropriateness and the style of the situation. Organization and administrative style has to be selected based on the contingencies that exist within the organization. So, other minor things to note, final thoughts. Organizations that deal successfully with uncertain environments differentiate internally more than less successful organizations do. Basically, that means that they're making their changes internally, but the successful organizations aren't going to be able to do that because this is the way something's always gone and it's always worked. When there are new technological developments that are developed externally, that can change the contingencies that affect how the school looks. The school system or school is a socio-technical system is in constant dynamic interaction with the larger external environment in which it exists. So I think this is a difficult chapter, but you have the responsibility to take some of these ideas and determine what actually works for you while watching this video. I think these are good ideas, and I think it's worthy of you actually reading this chapter to understand it. Some of the ideas are really going to help you be proactive in how you approach the case study and the conference paper and in how you interpret BRIC. If you need anything from me, please don't hesitate to ask.